I have a bit of a weird relationship with seasonal anime, in that I don't usually watch it as seasonal anime. I'll typically scan through the new releases, pick out which ones catch my eye, and then wait for it to finish airing so I can binge the whole thing later in my own time. This has especially become the case in the last few years, during which I've spent more time going out of my way to engage with other forms of media besides anime, meaning I've naturally become more picky and selective about the anime I do still watch and finish. Not to say I avoid seasonal anime altogether, sometimes something leaves a really strong impression, enough for me to keep up with it for at least a few weeks, sometimes even finish it, but even then, sometimes I'll just fall behind because I don't have the time and need to binge the remaining episodes at a later date.
Heavenly Delusion, also commonly known by its native Tengoku Daimakyō, is a show that very quickly caught my eye, way back when the anime adaptation was first teased. The title, combined with the general aesthetic and vibe of the poster, were enough to get me intrigued, and that was the point I promptly started avoiding almost all information about it. There are certain shows that I kinda just look at and know for a fact I'm going to enjoy most if I go in knowing absolutely nothing about them.
So I avoided watching trailers, staff announcements, and even the show itself, a task aided by the fact that Disney somehow managed to snag the license, and at the time of writing, man had literal pennies to their name, so that was out of the question.
But finally, I found myself in a position to watch this mysterious show, and binged all 13 episodes in about 3 or 4 days, and, well, if the fact that this video exists isn't enough of an indication, I have thoughts to share.
I wasn't lying about the pennies thing, by the way. Please share and comment for the algorithm, and also consider subbing to my Patreon, or just a one-time donation thing to Ko-fi or Bandcamp. I'd really appreciate it.
Let's get the good stuff out the way first, which I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear, is almost the entire fucking show.
Seriously, don't mistake any of the criticism I'm going to give as an indication that I don't like the show or don't want you to watch it. In fact, go watch it now. Even if you've already seen it, go watch it again, because this show seriously deserves eyes on it.
From a production standpoint, this shit is flawless. The character designs are really great, striking and memorable, but also simple enough for any animator to redraw them in their own style and still make it work. And trust me, they really let the animators go off in some scenes. The OP, for example, has an almost completely different style to the actual show, but god if it doesn't look good. The backgrounds are fantastic, the action and general animation and direction is peak, and the music, by Kensuke Ushio, who I'm somehow only now realizing is like one of my favourite composers ever, is also great. Seriously, why isn't it out yet?
But fancy bells and whistles a good show does not make. Good thing it was adapting an already great story.
The show is split between 2 storylines, a group of children living in some kind of isolated facility, and 2 young adults, Kiruko and Maru, as they travel through a post-apocalyptic Japan, both pursuing their respective targets. There are mysteries abound in this show. What exactly is the nature of the facility? Why do the kids there have strange abilities and features? How are the 2 storylines related? What caused the apocalypse to happen? What's up with all the man-eating monsters? What's this heaven Maru is searching for? And where are the whereabouts of the people Kiruko is looking for? All these mysteries are compelling, and the slow understanding gained episode by episode of how this world works is a lovely process. And that world itself, even without all the mystery, is really interesting.
Like I said, it's post-apocalyptic, but said apocalypse wasn't so severe that it completely wiped out human civilization. There's even some semblance of government still scattered about, though mostly through the form of isolated communities.
People are still dominant, just on a much smaller, decentralized scale now. Currency is even still a thing, which is a little depressing, but oh well, insert quote you all knew was coming here. Really though, what makes Heavenly Delusion so great to watch every episode are the characters, in particular our 2 leads, Kiruko and Maru. The school plotline is also great, but largely dominated by its plot and mysteries, whereas the post-apocalypse side is a lot more character-driven and really gives our leads the opportunity to just wallow in themselves, if that makes sense. The two just have a wonderful chemistry and bounce off each other really nicely. I think the fact they grew up post-Cataclysm helps in this regard. Since they have no context of the world they've lost, there's nothing for them to really mourn. This is just the normal world they live in and the normal lives they lead. Otherwise, I don't know if the series could get away with being as funny as it is. Also want to shout out their voice actors, Kayaka Senbongi and especially Gen Sato. They both do a phenomenal job of bringing the characters to life.
And speaking of character, we should talk about Kiruko, and specifically the themes they bring to the show, namely gender and how it informs our relationships with ourselves and the people around us. Spoilers for episodes 2 and onwards.
See, Kiruko is actually Haruki, whose brain, due to a fatal, somewhat mysterious accident, ended up in the body of his older sister, Kiriko, one of the people they're chasing being the doctor who performed the operation.
As you would imagine, suddenly finding yourself in a body that's a different sex to you does all sorts of things to your identity, and the show goes out of its way to make a point that a trans identity isn't as simple as man, now woman.
Kiruko still generally thinks of themselves as a man and refers to themselves as such when given the choice, but also doesn't bother to correct anyone who assumes them to be a woman based on their outward appearance.
This could easily be explained as them not wanting to go through the whole "my brain is in my sister" story, but after they tell it to Maru in episode 3, he earnestly asks them if they would prefer he stop calling them sis, as he's done up to that point.
And Kiruko tells him they don't mind, even kind of preferring they continue.
Maru and Kiruko's relationship is another way the series explores the latter's fluid, non-binary gender identity.
Maru develops an attraction to Kiruko, which persists and arguably gets stronger in the episodes after learning their backstory. You might see this at first as Maru simply seeing Kiruko for their female body and nothing else, and I think had this been a lesser series, this probably would have been the route they would go down. But the show confirms multiple times in fact that Maru likes Kiruko because of their masculine traits, not in spite of them. He admits that he probably wouldn't be attracted to them like he is if they were a man or a woman. They're Kiruko, nothing more and nothing less, and that's what makes them hot, which says as much about them as it does him.
In the end, the show never really establishes what Kiruko's gender is, and I kind of hope they never do. The truth is, gender and sexuality are a lot more nuanced and weird than people often realise. From where I'm standing, it's a bit of a hot mess actually. And to see a show that reflects that mess, as a non-binary person with a similarly confusing relationship to gender, it's nice to see. If you're also a trans/non-binary person, leave a comment talking about how you thought they handled Kiruko's character, even if and especially if you didn't like it. As I said, I enjoy how kind of inconclusive and slightly messy it is. I like that it doesn't pretend there's a simple binary that Kiruko can just fit into, plus I think it just gels with how eccentric and weird the show can be. But I'd also like to hear other people's thoughts, including any criticisms you might have, of which, despite all the praise I've just given, I do have a few. Spoiler warning for episodes 12 and 13. Also, content warning. We're going to be talking about. If that's an issue for you, I'm afraid this is where we part ways. Thanks for watching.
So, in addition to the Doctor, one of the people Kiruko is searching for is Robin, who was there and their sister's mentor figure, who went missing along with the Doctor after the accident that saw Kiriko lose her life, and Haruki, now Kiruko, their body. After chasing trails and dead ends all season, Kiruko and Maru find a large, advanced settlement run by the Ministry of Reconstruction, with Robin holding the position of chief. Upon finding him, Kiruko is of course overjoyed, with Maru staying in their room so his companion can privately catch up with a man who is basically their father figure. They explain their situation, and Robin knew both Kiriko and Haruki well enough to recognize that the latter is in there. Robin then suggests that Kiruko take a bath. They do. When they get out, they find their clothes are missing. Robin calls from the room down the hall, telling them to just come like that. They do. Robin then handcuffs them to the bed, and... Yeah.
To be fair, it's not like Heavenly Delusion hasn't dabbled in this kind of topic before.
Just before this, there was an arc where Kiruko and Maru meet Juichi, who is an escaped breeding pig from some kind of dystopian matriarchy. But throughout this plotline, even though it does have sincere and horrific moments, the show never loses its odd, slightly off-kilter style. Not to mention, Juichi is at first characterized as an unreliable, shady man, so you doubt the validity of his story at first. And even when it is shown to be true, it's only presented through stylized flashbacks and retelling, with the actual suffering Juichi and his fellow slaves experience not actually being explored all that much, meaning that by the end of the storyline, it feels more like a background characterization of the setting and is thus easier to distance yourself from.
Not only do we see this scene actually happen in real time, not only to one of our main characters, but the show completely drops any sense of joviality or quirkiness.
The scene is unambiguously cruel, violent, and uncomfortable, as to the show's credit it should be.
I know that's like probably the bare minimum that a scene be treated as serious and traumatic, but if Sword Art Online is any indication, not everyone got the memo. But you can treat something seriously while still using it in an unintentionally exploitative way. Is this what Heavenly Delusion does? Does the scene justify itself? I think it kinda does. In theory, at least.
What I do like about this scene is that it feeds into and adds to those previously mentioned themes of gender and identity, specifically regarding the confusion Kiruko feels regarding who they actually are. Earlier, when registering with the Ministry of Reconstruction, Kiruko is unable to fill in the gender box, a box that has caused me no end of annoyance because I don't fit into it, and neither does Kiruko. And what Robin does is force them into it anyway. He holds their head, turns it to the mirror, and asks them over and over, "Who do you see? Whose body am I touching right now?" Until he gets the answer he wants. It's cis. And it's repulsive and disgusting to watch, and it's how it feels to be told you're something you're not. It doesn't matter what you say, what you think, what you know you are. I see you this way, therefore you are this way. And that's something that a lot of people can relate to. Especially people like me.
Having said that, the execution is far from perfect, and I have a few issues I'd like to go over. Firstly, how the series handled similar instances prior to this event.
I already mentioned that Juichi's backstory involves him going through something very similar to Kiruko, only for a much longer period of time, but the show generally keeps its off-kilter energy throughout the whole plotline.
I'm not really bothered by this, since once it's established that Juichi is actually telling the truth, there are no jokes made at his expense. It's just that there's no real shift in tone to accommodate the subject matter. I'm willing to forgive this, however, since, like I said, any humour in these episodes isn't made at his or his companion's expense, and his experiences and trauma are treated seriously. What I'm less forgiving of is actually related to that humour, unfortunately.
I really don't like these jokes because I feel like they blemish what is otherwise a really enjoyable, really funny and really heartfelt relationship. There are a couple times where Maru basically attempts to force himself on Kiruko. The first, in episode 2, he forcefully tries to kiss them. This only lasts for like a second and he immediately apologizes, but like, why do it in the first place? The second one in episode 6 is better in some ways and worse in others. Basically, Kiruko has promised Maru that if he gets their battery for their gun while avoiding the scorched bear stalking them, long story, he can touch their boobs, and now he's come to collect his due. It starts out amusing enough. Kiruko tries to turn him off by reminding him that he's going to be fondling a man, and he's just like, titty is titty, mate. But then it goes on, and he's pushing them on the bed and unzipping their jacket, and it's not as funny anymore. If Toturi had interrupted them before that point, I don't think it would have been as much of a red flag.
The thing about these two jokes is that I was prepared to sweep them under the rug. Though they kind of stick out like a pair of somewhat bruised thumbs, there's only 2 of them, and the show moves on quickly enough, so whatever. I've been watching anime for almost 10 years now. I've seen far worse. But then episode 12 happened, and those 2 moments that also flirt with dubious consent suddenly become a lot harder to excuse as just 2 weirdos fucking about. I've seen numerous discussions and reactions to episode 6, and I haven't seen anyone raise much of an issue with this one scene, so I don't know, maybe I'm just overthinking things. But when you have one instance of violated consent in a sexual context taken seriously, it makes me wonder why the prior ones weren't meant to be taken so.
Is it because we know Maru wouldn't hurt Kiruko? By episode 2, we're still getting to know these guys, so nothing is off the table, and in episode 6, man looked like he was pretty intent on copping a feel. You can't even really have the excuse that he's a child of the apocalypse who hasn't grown up in a healthy environment to learn boundaries with someone he's attracted to. When Kiruko doesn't come home after 2 days, he storms into the filtration plant, sees them tied up naked in the bed, immediately clocks what's happening, and beats the shit out of Robin. So he does understand the importance of boundaries and consent, so what's all this other stuff about? If just one or the other existed, I wouldn't have much of an issue, but having them together just doesn't work for me. It's like trying to have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, you see, this is why I don't like these jokes. Why are you making me compare Maru, who's genuinely a chill, fun guy to watch, to this fucking psychopathic Spike Spiegel wannabe? Speaking of Robin and Maru, while I'm not going to say it isn't satisfying to see the latter make the former eat cement, I did kind of roll my eyes at it a little bit. It kind of centers the action around Maru being this stone cold badass as he beats the cowardly sicko within an inch of his life, all cold and stoic like, and not Kiruko, you know, the actual victim.
They do have a scene afterwards where they talk about it, which I like. The incident having left Kiruko with no real sense of identity anymore. This is where Maru tells them that they like them for who they are now, whatever they choose to be. They can never be the man Haruki once was, but they also aren't the woman Kiriko was. Who they are, whether it rests somewhere between these identities or completely outside them, is only for them to figure out, and they're deserving of support, admiration and love regardless.
I also like how Kiriko expresses frustration with the idea that Maru needs to protect them, which is not only an acknowledgement of that annoying trope, but also funny since they're meant to be his bodyguard, they're supposed to be protecting him.
However, this is the only scene that really dwells on what happened. By the end of the episode, they're back on the road, their usual energy up and running, ready for next season, I guess. Now, I haven't read past this point in the manga, so I can't say this never comes up. In fact, I imagine it does, given that Robin's fate is still inconclusive. I'm just disappointed that in this episode in particular, the impression we get is that they move on pretty quickly without really addressing what happened. I guess you would want to end a season on a semi-conclusive note, but in this case, I think it would have benefited from lingering a little, or even just signalling more clearly that this aspect of Kiruko's development isn't over. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't think what I've mentioned invalidates the show's good aspects, which are nearly all of its aspects. Out of all the new shows and films I've seen this year, this is definitely up there with one of my favourites, and I really want to encourage more people to watch it. Having said that, I feel like it would be disingenuous to do so without making my reservations known.
There are very few things in life I would describe as perfect, and most works of fiction sure as hell aren't. Even ones I love I wouldn't say are perfect in a universally appealing kind of way. Acknowledging something's imperfections isn't the same as saying it's bad, just that it could be better. This almost certainly isn't the last time I've seen Heavenly Delusion. I'd like to watch it in English next time, and I'll probably start the manga at some point, and that's because it's got a lot to like about it, enough to make me really invested in the characters and their world and their story. It's a really good series I'd recommend you watch. It just could have been better. This month's video was supposed to be about the Bag of Milk games, but a combination of this script taking longer than predicted and life have pushed that back, unfortunately. Should be good for next month though. If you want to get updates in the meantime, pledge to my Patreon. Any amount will get you access to the feed and any updates I post there. If you want to go further and pledge to one of the tiers, you get stuff like credits and videos, early access to music, as well as access to uncut videos should I run into any copyright problems. But otherwise, thanks for watching, subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.